Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to another GameMaker tutorial. And this is going to be the last tutorial for the RTS series. And it's not a finished game, but it does give you a great engine to start with, and you can expand on top of this engine pretty easily because of the parenting system that I've got set up. So, the first thing that you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create two buttons, and I've just made these 24 pixels by 24 pixels, and they're pretty simple. I've got this little white ship in the middle with a dark gray, and then in the second frame I've got a light gray with the same white. And I've got one for the worker, sprite worker button, and I've got one for the fighter, sprite fighter button. Because we're going to be making it so that you can actually create units. So the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into, object station. And we're going to complicate object station a bit. Spoilers, go into the create event, and we're after this state equals idle, we're going to do a whole ton of stuff. First thing we're going to do is we're going to set our own selected variable. Selected equals false. Then we're going to create what's called our button distance. So distance, this is going to be the distance that our buttons sit from the space station. So when the player clicks on the space station, it'll bring up the kind of a UI where they can create units from. And this is going to be how far away those buttons are. So let's set this to 64. Then we're going to do an object, and we're going to do, this is going to be an array. The 0th element is going to be object worker button, and then we're going to have button object 1 equals object fighter. Okay, those are going to be objects that we create here in a minute. Now we're going to have a count for how many there are, because the space station might need to create more than just one button. So, or two buttons. So I've built the system to where you can just add different buttons to it without having to change anything. So we're going to do button count equals array length 1D, because this is a one-dimensional array. I just typed a but instead of button. Button object. And the fact that I laughed at that shows how mature I am. Okay, we're gonna do button section size equals 360 divided by button count. And then we're going to do button X position 0 equals 0, and button Y position 0 equals 0. So we set up a few arrays and some variables here. Now we're going to loop through and create our buttons. So we're going to do for var I equals 0, I is less than button count, I plus plus. And then in here we're going to do button X position I equals X plus length dir x. We're turning the x and y position into a distance and a direction. So button distance and section size times I. Space those out so you can see. Okay, we're going to copy this whole line right here. And we're going to change this to Y, this to Y, this to Y, and then we should be good. Now we're going to actually create the button. So button I equals instance create. Then we're going to use our X position that we just did here, comma, and then our Y position that we just did here. Control C, Control V, and then we're going to do button object I. So we want to make sure we create the right object, because we'll have different objects inside of this array for the different buttons. Then after that, we want to deactivate this object because we don't want to show it or have it function at all right now. We're just going to attach it and then deactivate it. So when something's deactivated, it doesn't show up in the game at all and none of its events run. Okay, and that is it for the create event. Let's create our new objects now. Let's call this object ship creation button parent. This is a big one. I'm just going to give it the sprite worker button. And spoilers, because my stuff keeps popping up. We're going to give it a create event, and it's going to have all that stuff in it that you just saw. So add a create event, drag over a code. And we're going to call this initialize the button image index equals 0, image speed equals 0, because we don't want it to cycle through the images, and we want it to start on the dark image inside of our sprite. And we're going to give this a cost equals 25 and ship equals object player worker. It doesn't really matter in our parent object, but I'm just creating those anyways. Now we're going to do a left pressed. So add event, mouse, left pressed. Create the ship. If global dot crystals is greater than or equal to the cost. So basically, if we have enough money to create this ship, we're going to create an instance create xy ship. Global dot crystals minus equals cost. So once we make sure that we have enough money, and then we actually spend that money right here, this is where we create the ship. And it'll create whatever we've set to this variable. So in the different buttons that we create, we're going to set different ship variables for which one that one will create. Then we're going to do image index equals 0, image x scale equals 1, image y scale equals 1. These might not make sense right now, but we're going to actually scale it and change the image index when we're hovering over the button. So we want to set these all back to the default. With object ship, this whole line right there, I'm just going to auto have that come in. We're going to do instance deactivate object self. So this is going to go through and deactivate all of the buttons that we have created, because we just used one of them and we don't want them to show up anymore. Okay. Now we're going to have add event mouse enter. This is when the mouse comes over the button. So the hover image slash size. So we're going to do image index equals 1, image x scale equals 1.15, image y scale equals 1.15. And then you can just copy this right here. And we're going to do add event mouse leave, and we're going to do set these to 1 back to normal, and then set this to 0. And that's all we're going to do there. Yep. Okay. Now we have our... Oh yeah, so another thing, we're going to need to set this to negative 90. Set the depth on this to negative 90. Okay, now we're going to create 2 more objects. Object ship button and object, well, that should have been a worker button, fighter button. Make sure and give them a depth of negative 90 as well. Did I do 90? Yeah, okay. And change this to worker. I said ship, but it should be worker. Okay, and they're both going to have a parent of the ship button creation parent. Did I remember to set the depth on this? I knew I didn't. I knew I forgot that. Okay. Now they're just going to have, all they're going to need is their own little create events. So add event create. Initialize the worker button. Events inherited. So we can inherit the events. Cost equals 25. We don't ship equals object player worker. We don't need to type these in because they're already inherited, but just for clarification, it's easier to read this code if I type them in. Now we're going to do it for the fighter, and it's going to be the exact same thing. So just copy that, add event, create event, paste that in, and then just change this to fighter. Fighter. And I'm going to make fighters cost it's object player fighter. I changed the wrong thing. And I'm going to change this to it doesn't really matter. You can set it whatever you want. I'm going to set it to 50. Costs 50 crystals to build a fighter. Okay. Those 2 sections are done. Now what we need to do is we need to put some more onto our station. Our station needs a little bit more work. Let's come into the step event. Okay, that all looks good. We've got some code that we don't technically need right now, but okay, we're gonna do a left released event, add event mouse left released. And the reason we're using released instead of pressed is because of the timing on this. If we were to do a left pressed, you'll see why, but we just, for timing reasons, we need to do a left released. Set selected. If not selected, selected equals true. For var I equals 0, I is less than button count, I plus plus, oops. Instance activate object button I. So remember we stored all of our different buttons that we created, in the instances, inside of this array right here. So we're looping through this array and activating them all. So basically when we're selected, we want to activate all the buttons that are associated with this space station, so that the player can see them and interact with them. Now we're going to do a left pressed, a global left press. So add event, mouse. Let's see. Global mouse, left pressed. This basically means if we click anywhere else in the window after we're already selected, then we want to unselect the ship and deactivate everything. Set selected. Selected equals false. If, okay, let's maximize this so we can see it better because this is going to be a big code. If not position meeting mouse X, mouse Y, object ship creation button parent. Basically, if we're not over a button, with object ship, yeah, the big, huge, long one, we want to activate them all. Instance, or deactivate them. Deactivate object self. So inside of this, inside of all of our buttons, we're gonna deactivate them. And the reason we need to check to make sure we're not pressing a button, because if we are on top of one and actually clicking on it, then we'll end up deactivating it before we even click on it. So we'll deactivate everything inside of each individual button when we click on one, but if we don't click on one, we need to deactivate them, and that's what this does. And then the last thing we're going to do is a draw event, just to make this look a little nicer. Draw, drag over a code. Draw event for the station. That's kind of a useless comment, but if selected, draw self. Now you'll see why we created the button X position array. The reason we did is so that we could draw little lines to them. For var I. It's not actually necessary, but it just makes it look nicer. I is less than or equal to button count. I plus plus. Then we're going to do draw line width color X, Y, button X position I, button Y position I, 1, because we're just going to, the width is going to be 1. I guess we don't need to do draw line width if we're doing a width of 1. C light gray. If you wanted to change that width, you could though. C light gray. And I'm just using light gray because it doesn't look too bad actually with light gray. Okay. Well, I think it's actually ready to test. Trying to remember if there's something else. I'm sure it'll pop up with an error if I miss something. Button X position I. Variable, let's see. Variable get button section size. Let's go into our station. Variable get, oh, I forgot one of the T's. There we go. Button section size. Okay, so when we click on it, our buttons come. Oh, we need to center those. Okay, go back up to our little, you might have already done this, but I forgot to. I'm going to center both of those buttons. You can see when I click on the station, we get these two buttons that pop up, but we We can't actually create anything because we don't have the money. So let's collect some crystals first. Let's mine some. Let's move this guy over here so he's kind of not in the way. We've got our bad guys down here still. Okay, we've got 25 crystals. That's enough to create a worker. So let's create another worker. You can see it subtracted from our crystals and created our second worker. And we're almost at 25 again, because once you get a few workers on this, they kind of run into each other. But here pretty soon we'll be able to create another fighter. Let's do 2 more workers first, and then we'll create a fighter. It might be smart to have your minerals a little further away from the space stations. But, okay, we can create a fighter now. Let's move him over here. We can create 2, actually. Okay, we have way enough. We've got a huge army now. We can send our army over and wipe these guys out, because we're awesome. Boom. Killed their army. Got tons of crystals now. Now let me show you the cool thing about this system, okay? If you come in, let's say you add a new unit to your game. And you want to be able to create that unit. Well, you can create a new button. And all you have to do is set the unit that it creates and the cost of how much it is for that unit. And then when you go into your station, all you have to do is add a new button object to this array. That's all. So we can do another one here and just change this to a 2. And in fact, let's do quite a few. Let's say you add like a bunch of units, okay? So we can change that to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We've got 8 units, 8 new units total. So now watch what happens when we run the game and we click on our space station. What you'll notice is, boom, it automatically divides up the space for each of those buttons. And actually, I think it looks really cool. So that's how that works. So now we have a working game. We've got enemies with basic artificial intelligence. We've got a space station. We've got mining where you can collect resources. We've got unit creation. I mean, we've got the basics for a nice little RTS engine here. So I really appreciate you guys for following me through this series. And now I'm going to be dedicating more time to the Pokemon-like series that I'm working on and the 3D RPG series. And I'm going to throw out some new videos that are related to my book as well. So be sure and check those out. I really appreciate everything you guys do for me, for following my videos, for liking, subscribing. That just really helps. So be sure and like, favorite, and subscribe if you haven't already. And I will talk to you guys later.